idea is awareness is always with you. The question is, are you aware of that awareness at that moment? The awareness is always there. I can get consumed into my life and lose consciousness of that awareness, but the awareness is always there. So how do you bring yourself back into awareness? You have to have trigger points to which you can bring yourself back into awareness. And that's where practices like mindfulness, meditation, all of this helps, because it just creates these trigger points for you. And I think what I realized is, when you suffer, it is your ego that takes a beating, because you have built this image in the society around you of who you are, what you are. Everyone identifies you as the sportsman, as the senior executive at the bank, as this family man, and as a good husband, etc. So you've created this image of who you are. And you're trying to live up to that image, right?
An identity that you've created for yourself.
Identity that you've created. And when something like this happens, I think what hurts you is the fact that your public persona is getting dented.
Right.
And that is causing that inner suffering. The fact that, one is to handle this issue for yourself,
right,
but more importantly, how do I face it in the outside world? What do I tell people what's going on? How do I tell them? And that becomes more a reason for suffering rather than just the internal issue.
Right. Now, when you look at it, it's been a long journey and you're still on that journey. And when your ego is now getting affected by an external source, what do you do? Do you have the same feelings as you had it when you actually was being investigated by the HR team at the ANZ? Or has it changed significantly?
Yeah, I think so. I would say the last 7 years since I left my corporate career with Assay in 2017, one of the reasons I didn't want to go back into the corporate world was because I wanted to explore how could I be more myself. Because till that point, I felt like I had this external persona that I used to have.
A facade.
In the office. And then there was the Sandeep who was at home with his kids, with his wife, with his friends. And I lived these two lives. And I wanted to find a way of bringing these two lives together so that I'm not this different person at work and a different person at home. How do I get greater alignment so that I can be comfortable to be who I am, whether I'm working or whether I'm at home? So I realized for me, maybe to start with, I have to change my work conditions so that I'm more comfortable to be in a place where I can be myself. Because I felt in a lot of corporate roles, the circumstances are such that it forces you to be someone who you're not, because the organization demands that of you. So I stayed out of the large corporate world and I moved into more of a small, medium businesses environment. And I took on more of a consulting advisory type of role. And that allowed me to some extent to be a little bit more myself, because I was setting the tone of how I wanted to engage, etc. So that was still operating on the external world. But I think really what changed it for me through this process is to recognize, but why do I have this need to be someone externally? Where is that coming from? Where is this idea that I have to be someone? And what is it that causes me to want to put up this type of a front, right? And that was more an inner engineering. And I did a course with Sadhguru. It was called Inner Re-Engineering. And he starts helping you understand this internal, external manifestation and how you can rework yourself internally to be better presented externally. And I think through those programs and other things, I realized it's more an internal readjustment, And I did a course in mindfulness as well with the Search Inside Yourself Institute run by Google. That gave me some insight on how can I bring what I'm learning internally more into an external conversation. So I started teaching mindfulness as well. And I realized as I taught, I learned through the process, because teaching is one of the best ways of learning.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the things that I am intrigued is when you say that you were doing this inner engineering and then trying to dive deep within and going deep within. There's a lot of words that we've been using. And for a lot of people who have not gone through that trauma or have not asked those questions, this going inner or diving deep and finding out those questions might be a difficult thing to even comprehend. I'm just wondering, are you able to share with us, what really happened when you did this inner engineering, and what were you trying to really do within you so that your external world also changes with the inner changes that is happening?
I would say the fundamental change that happens through all of these programs is a greater understanding of self-awareness. It's a greater understanding of what is this entity that is, where is this entity? What is this? It's an awareness, right? So I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have emotions, I have the energy inside me. There is this body that is functioning. The body and the mind seem to be working in some sort of. But then as you explore, you realize, okay, this body is working largely without me being in control. This mind is operating largely without me having any influence over exactly what thoughts are going to come into my mind and when they're going to come and why they're. So there seems to be something that is operating, that is running this whole system. Even though I think I'm in charge, I'm actually really not in charge. There is almost like a inner process that is working in itself. And I'm just observing that inner process of working, right? And I'm almost sort of like a passenger noticing all of these things rather than being really in charge.
Now, this observing what is going through within you and observing those thoughts that you mentioned, it is not an easy process as such, isn't it? Because we are not used to it. No. By default, we actually have no idea. We don't have the kind of awareness. So how did that awareness come into you? Did the inner engineering help you, or was there some other practice that you did that you were able to observe what is happening within you? It's absolutely a different kind of world altogether, isn't it? Observing what is happening within you.
I remember listening to a story which resonated with me.
Right.
The story was, imagine there's a fast-moving river.
Right.
Now you're in the fast-moving river. And basically the power of the river is such that it is just taking you down with the current of the river. And if the river goes left, you go left. If the river goes right, you go right. Because the current of the river is so strong. But when you're in the river, all you're trying to do is manage that current as best as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's taking you where it's taking you, but you're just trying to maneuver through it as best as you possibly can.
Yeah.
But then I realized, what if you were sitting on the bank of the river and watching this fast-moving river going down? You see it very differently. You just see this fast-moving river with a strong current, right? But you also notice how remarkably serene everything is around it, right? That ability to observe that there are two things happening at the same time. There is this fast-moving river with a strong current, but around it, there is this serene mountains and the banks. And I can choose to be in the river with the full flow of the currents, or I can sit on the banks of the river and observe the river, right? And that awareness allows me to take either of those two positions.
That's a beautiful story as such, isn't it? That gives you a complete understanding of, how we as human get trapped in this flow of life. And for most people, there's no comeback. And we're kind of caught in it.
Yes.
And we don't have a choice. But what happens is, with that kind of awareness comes a choice that we don't have to be living in that kind of life. Even the corporate life that people always get into, and then most people don't enjoy it. They want to come out of it, but they're trapped. But I guess if you're able to take some time and do this diving deep within and ask those questions that you've asked, probably we have a choice to either sit out and observe or be caught in that, I would say, duck pond that we call, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think somewhere along the way, through this process of awareness, which gradually keeps increasing as you become more proficient at observing this awareness and using this awareness, and in a way the awareness uses you, because it sort of keeps coming back to you in different situations at different points in time. I started realizing that this body will come and go, this mind will come and go, but this sense of who I am remains regardless of whether the body is there or not. And that in a way that I am is equal to this awareness. Right? And then of course when I started reading about Vedanta and all, I realized, well, that when they talk about this Atman and Brahman and all of these ideas, it comes from this very simple idea that what is this I am? What is this thing that I say I am? So, today I say I am Sandeep and I get identified with Sandeep. So I am is equal to Sandeep. But if I'm able to observe I am more closely, I realize that Sandeep is also just another transient experience. The I am will remain whether Sandeep is there or not.
Right.
That is the moment where you realize you can sit on the bank of the river.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to be in the river.
Yeah. I think that's a profound knowing as such, that knowledge. One of the other thing I wanted to ask you is, in a day-to-day life, you're kind of going into a shop, and the shopkeeper or the lady or the person who is actually serving you was a bit rude to you.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how this awareness or, the feeling that you have now it has helped you, or is it helping?
Yeah. So, I spoke about anger earlier, right? One of the things I found was my biggest change was I used to be quite angry as a person, and mainly with my loved ones, so like my wife and my kids and my mom were probably the worst recipients of my anger. And it wasn't like I got angry all the time, but every now and then I would lose it. And when I lost it, I would say things that I didn't want to say. And I would feel terribly guilty after that, sort of that 20 minutes of outburst or 15 minutes of outburst. And then you're trying to recover from it. And you think, how can I be so out of control for that short period of time, right? Through this self-awareness, I found an answer to this type of a situation, because I think I sort of mentioned earlier, I could experience this anger slowly arise, and you could look at it and say, what is causing this anger?
So this came with a practice, did it?
So let's say you're talking about that shopkeeper now.
Yeah.
It's a small example. But say earlier, the shopkeeper says something and you get a bit offended, you snap back at them, right?
Yeah, you react.
Now, the shopkeeper says something. If I'm aware at that moment when this is happening.
And how do you bring that awareness at that moment?
So I think the whole idea is awareness is always with you. The question is, are you aware of that awareness at that moment? Right? The awareness is always there. I can get consumed into my life and lose consciousness of that awareness, but the awareness is always there. So how do you bring yourself back into awareness? You have to have trigger points through which you can bring yourself back into awareness. And that's where practices like mindfulness, meditation, all of this helps, because it just creates these trigger points for you to. But for me, say something like this in a shop, when this person says, just in that moment, I can press a pause button and I can say to myself, you know what, she's probably just having a tough day. So I'm reframing the experience in my mind just by pressing that pause button and stopping a reaction, and instead saying, giving the benefit of doubt to the other person, saying, you know, she could be having a tough day. Now, that process of inner reframing only comes when awareness is there. When awareness is not there, there is action, reaction, action, reaction. But when there's awareness, there's action, pause, response.
A different kind of response,
And
isn't it?
because it's a more considered response. It's
Right.
a more thoughtful response. It's
Right.
a more appropriate response. It's a response that says, can I do or say something that is a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more considerate. So you're buying yourself time through awareness to be a little bit more, not your immediate self, but your better self.
Sure. And these days, I'm just wondering whether your wife and children, have they noticed the change in you, the way you react to them and also to the external world as well, because your inner world has changed significantly?
It's funny you ask that, because just the other day I was having this conversation with someone over lunch, and I was telling him about what I teach in mindfulness and all, and how it's helped me with my anger and everything like that. And he quickly looks at Vaishali, my wife, and says, Vaishali, what do you think? He thinks he's been able to, what do you think? And she said, you know, I cannot tell you how much of a change he has gone through over the last 20 years. And she said, initially he used to say a lot of things, but I didn't really believe it. But then as things started improving, I got more interested in what is he doing? Why is he doing this? How is this having such an effect? And even with my children, I think they cannot believe how much transformation I have gone through over the last.
That's a great benchmark, isn't it? If they're able to actually notice the difference,
Correct.
Then you're on the right track.
Correct. And in fact, they make fun of me now, where they say, Dad's become a softie, or Dad's become, you know, and they see me now with my dog Kaya, and they say, how come you're like this with Kaya and you were not like this when we were young at that stage? So I think people are noticing that change. People are noticing the difference. I'm not having to say why I have changed, but they're now asking me what I'm doing and how I'm managing things. And I think the teaching of mindfulness keeps me honest, because you cannot teach something if you're not practicing that yourself. One of the reasons I also find teaching useful is you're always sharpening your saw with it.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's keeping you honest as well, because you cannot say something unless you're actually
Right.
living it in that way yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
What seemed like the most difficult situation in your life today, you look back and say that was the most defining period in my life. And there's a reason why this happened, and I think we talked about the opening about suffering and how it becomes a trigger for change. And that is true for a lot of people. Suffering is the window to your soul.